All right, welcome everyone. Let's look at blood glucose regulation. When we talk about blood glucose regulation, we're talking about the fact that when you eat food, let us say you eat your posho, you eat your rice, cassava, potatoes. Um, these foods that we just mentioned actually contain carbohydrates, and these carbohydrates are converted into glucose, which is the simplest form of carbohydrates. So this glucose is what mainly the body uses for different functions. So the level of glucose in your blood has to be controlled. It should be within a given set limit. Okay, so we want to see what are the mechanisms of making sure that the blood glucose levels is actually the blood glucose level is actually maintained within a particular range. Okay, so how do we achieve that? What are the mechanisms involved? Do we have a negative feedback mechanism? If so, what triggers this mechanism? Okay, what hormones are involved, or what organs are involved, and what happens when blood glucose is not well regulated? That is what we are going to look at now. So glucose is very important. We get glucose from the food that we eat, and also we get glucose also when for example, fats are converted into glucose. So we can have other foods that are not containing carbohydrates, but when we eat them, we can get glucose from them. Okay, so this is to say that glucose can be derived from carbohydrate containing foods, but also can be derived from other foods. Okay, it's very important in the body because it is what the body breaks down to give us energy in the form of ATP through the process of what we call cellular respiration. Okay, so cellular respiration mainly involve glucose as the substrate. Okay, so glucose undergoes several reactions to produce energy in the form of ATP. Why is it that the body actually relies a lot on glucose? Glucose is highly soluble and can easily be transported in solution via plasma. So the tissues, even the brain needs glucose. It doesn't receive glucose, and they have a lot of problems happening. And therefore, that means that there should be constant supply of glucose to the brain. Okay, and also that means that the amount of glucose in the body also needs to be maintained at a particular range, usually between 90 to 100 milligrams per 100 ml of human blood. You should have, that is the range of the glucose. So 90 to 100, that's the normal range. And if you go above that, then you have what you call hyperglycemia. If you go down below 90, then you have issues of hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia when you have low, hyperglycemia when you have high. Okay. Yes. So that means that there are two ways of maintaining the blood glucose levels within the normal range. So we have mechanisms that can raise the blood glucose levels up if it is low, and they have also mechanisms that will help in reducing the blood glucose levels down if they are actually high. So we have hormones playing a role in that. Insulin is the one which tries to reduce that, and then glucagon is what raises the blood glucose levels. Okay, where do these hormones come from? The pancreas plays an important role, because actually the pancreas is the one that produces these two hormones. Yes, so we are basically saying that the pancreas is the most important organ in the regulation of blood glucose. It produces the two hormones, insulin and glucagon. Okay, and we have seen that insulin reduces, whereas glucagon increases. So how come that actually the pancreas can produce these two hormones? We have what we call the islets of Langerhans is here. Okay, this has what we call the alpha and beta cells. Okay, the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans are the ones that produce insulin. Okay, and the insulin reduces, whereas the alpha cells of islets of Langerhans are the ones that produce glucagon, which increases glucose if glucose is actually low. Okay, so what are the effectors? Okay, what are the effectors? So what basically implements? Okay, implements the instructions by insulin or glucagon, or where does the insulin and glucagon act? The answer is actually the liver. So the liver is another very important organ in terms of regulation of glucose. So what the liver does is actually that it can get excess glucose and convert it into glycogen, and also can convert that glycogen back into glucose. And that happens under the influence of the two hormones. So if we want less glucose, that means we convert that glucose into glycogen. If we want more glycogen, we convert that glycogen into glucose. Okay, so glycogen into glucose, glucagon is the hormone we need. And then if you want to get glucose from glycogen, we use glucagon. That's the hormone. And if we want to convert glucose into glycogen, then we use insulin. Okay, so that is something that you need to make sure that you know. So these processes actually happen in the liver. So that means that the pancreas and the liver are actually very important in blood glucose regulation. Okay, so remember, insulin is to make sure that we reduce the amount of blood glucose that we have. Okay, so what will it do? The major function is converting blood glucose into glycogen. Okay, that's one. Two is that it can increase the uptake of glucose by cells. So the cells will take more glucose because of insulin, to make sure that more is moved from the blood and taken into the cells. And then the other thing is it will increase the breakdown of glucose by the cells. Okay, all this you can see that it's making sure that the glucose remains low. Okay, or remains actually within the normal set point. And then we have it converts glucose still to other substances. For example, it actually converts glucose into fat, and this fat is what is stored in the adipose tissue. Okay, and then the last point, which is that it converts glucose, increases the conversion of glucose into glycogen, which is stored in the liver and also in the muscle cells. A process called glycogenesis. Okay, so how does this insulin act? Insulin will act when it binds to receptors that we call the glycoprotein receptors on cells, and then it triggers all these responses, response number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4, such that the blood glucose levels are brought to the normal range. Definitely, you could think that glucagon, okay? Definitely, you could think that glucagon actually will have the opposite effects to insulin. Okay, so for it, we need more glucose. So we need more glucose. Where do we get it from? From glycogen, which is the storage form, into glucose. Okay, also, maybe we can get glucose from other, let us say from fats, or let us say from amino acids. So we can also, glucagon can promote the conversion of amino acids and glycerol into glucose in the liver. Okay? So don't only think that it is insulin and the glucagon that are actually very important alone as hormones in the regulation of blood glucose. We also have other hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, being very important in regulation of glucose levels. Adrenaline is a hormone that is actually released when you are frightened, what we call the fight or flight response. When you see a snake, you definitely would want to run away. But immediately you see that snake, adrenaline will actually be released to make sure that you're prepared for such a response, or either to run away, which is a flight, or even to fight back. So adrenaline prepares you for such a response. So it increases the level of glucose because you need that glucose to be able to fight back or even to run. So it increases the amount of glucose in blood such that this glucose can be converted into energy in the form of ATP. And then we have cortisol, which is secreted when glycogen stores are actually depleted. Still, it also promotes what you call glyconeogenesis. When your body actually gets glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, for example, the amino acids and the fats that we actually talked about earlier on. So, in a normal human being, the blood glucose levels are maintained within that range that we talked about, 90 milligrams to 100 milligrams, 100 mils of blood, right? That's the normal range. But if we go beyond that, that is, if you go above that range, we have hyperglycemia, and then if we go below, then we have hypoglycemia. So these cause effects. For example, if you have taken long without eating, you will feel weak, you will feel dizzy, confused, and sometimes even you get seizures. So that means that if a child actually has not eaten, is not breastfeeding, is not eating anything, their blood glucose levels will actually go down, and they can get seizures and actually die. Okay, and also if you have a lot of glucose in your blood, it will damage your nerves, blood vessels, and other organs. So it is very, very important that actually your organs actually function properly to maintain the blood glucose levels. So exercising and eating the diet that is having carbohydrates and also avoiding issues of stress can contribute to maintaining proper levels of blood glucose. Okay, so that therefore means that eat healthy diets, exercise, manage your weight, and also manage your stress. These are key contributors to diabetes. Okay, diabetes. Diabetes is when the system that maintains your blood glucose level. Blood glucose levels are not actually working very well. What we are terming as dysfunction. Okay, when the homeostatic mechanisms for maintaining the blood glucose are not actually working, then you get diabetes mellitus. Okay, when you get diabetes mellitus, you get problems with the urination. You have blood in you have glucose in the urine. You be urinating frequently, and you get thirsty all the time, and many things can actually happen to you. Your immunity will go down, and you have to be placed on medication, and also lifestyle habits that you will have to be doing, okay, to make sure that your blood glucose levels are actually controlled. Okay, so diabetes can happen when you don't have sufficient insulin, or when you have a problem with the cells. You can have the right amount of insulin, but the cells are not responding to that insulin. Remember, the insulin has to bind to certain receptors that we call the glycoprotein receptors. If it doesn't, if this insulin binds there and the cells cannot respond, then you have a very big problem there. Okay, so that means that exercising is very important. It helps in maintaining blood glucose levels. Eating foods that contain fruits, vegetables, and also grains can also help. And then weight management is also very important. If you gain a lot of weight, you are likely to have insulin resistance. So even if you have the insulin, the cells do not respond to the insulin. Regulation of stress. Stress is associated with the other hormone that we talked about, cortisol, right? Yeah, that's the stress hormone. So when you have cortisol in your blood, in higher levels because of the stress, then you are going to have more glucose. Remember, for it promotes glycogenesis, making glucose from other sources, for example, fats or amino acids. So that marks the end of this presentation, where we have looked at the regulation of blood glucose levels. When you eat food, your blood glucose levels go up, okay, increase, but insulin is immediately released to make sure that high blood glucose level is actually reduced. But if your blood glucose level is actually low, the hormone called glucagon is actually secreted. Okay, glucagon and insulin are released from the pancreas, especially from the instead of lung glands, where we have the beta and the alpha cells. We also talked about insulin and cortisol as other hormones that are also very important. The liver and the pancreas play a key role in regulation of blood glucose. Exercising, diet control, and also reducing stress. These are very important lifestyle habits that